first one, and I'll start with Quisha. In my experience combating critical race theory in our schools, the most common pushback comes in the following form, referencing 6-year-old children. Quote, "My child is old enough to experience racism, therefore your child is old enough to learn about it." Comments?
When people, I find that what the left are people that are for critical race theory, they seem to think that every experience that Black people have is somehow tied to race or racism, and when they're putting this on children, I look at it as if almost they are speaking curses over the child. Because when you constantly, and this is in psychology as well, if you constantly speak something over anyone, especially when it's negative, you will internalize it and you will act out the thing that is being spoken over you. That's a biblical principle that is evident in psychology, and we do hear this. It is abhorrent to me. I wouldn't do that to my own children. Why would we go around speaking these negative words over our children daily? Why would we do that? It is, I have stopped being so forgiving for people who do this, because by now I feel like this is intentional. And I think it is being done to children, because it's not just Black children, it is white children as well, because they are supposed to be carrying this guilt, and then Black people are supposed to be, our minority children are supposed to be just oppressed and perpetually stuck in these buckets of life, and there's no way forward for that. I don't think it's an accident. I think it is intentional at this point.
Could you read your question one more time, and then I will have my visceral gut reaction to it.
In my experience combating critical race theory in our schools, the most common pushback comes in the following form in reference to 6-year-old children. Quote, "My child is old enough to experience racism, therefore your child is old enough to learn about it."
You know, what's so offensive about that is that children are not naturally racist, that when they're that age, they see their friends and they want to play. And what we're doing is that we're teaching children to see their classmates as being different. And what's very wrong with a Black parent teaching that child to be looking over their shoulder for racism and slights is that they're handicapping their child. But for the white child at 6 years old, to put a burden on them that they have no context for, they have not been taught critical thinking skills. And the problem with it also is that it involves shaming, because the white child is always shamed and they are taught that they are somehow to blame for the sins of their ancestors, and a 6-year-old is too young to even understand about an ancestor. And so it's not age appropriate, it's offensive, it's harmful, and there's a rich body of scientific literature about the harm of shaming children. And so I think if someone came at me with CRT is appropriate for a first grader, that I would just push back against them for their own racism, for the very idea that they would try to racialize the experience of a 6-year-old. I have a 6-year-old great-grandson, and I don't want him to be taught these things. He will be taught these things in the public schools. And if you want to understand just how loony the political left is, there's research, and like I came out of academia, and we get paid to sit in a chair and come up with ideas, and the crazier the idea, the greater the reward. And one of the things that someone came up with is that babies are racist by 6 months, and how you know this is that they prefer certain faces to others. Now, I imagine as a baby, I preferred those faces that were feeding me and changing my diapers and all of those things. And so I don't think that you can reason with the loony left, but we have to protect our children from them. And I'm glad that parents, not just white parents, but black parents like Quisha, immigrant parents, that they are standing up, they're fighting back about what is taking place at this moment in American history, because it does run counter to our civil rights laws, our Constitution, but also decency, human decency of who we are as Americans. As Americans, you know, we don't shame people because of the color of their skin, immutable characteristics, and people that do shame them, those are people that we condemn because we know that it's wrong. It's just un-American to do those things. And so for the longest time, I think that many white parents didn't know what to do because they have felt that civil rights was for black people or for racial minorities, that they were not covered by civil rights laws. They are absolutely covered by civil rights laws. They have the same right as everyone else to expect that their children will not be discriminated against, shamed, and bullied. And we all are called to stand up and fight against racism. And critical race theory argues that only white people can be racist and that white people have to be actively anti-racist. Well, all of us have an obligation to be anti-racist, and it's ludicrous to argue that only white people can be racist.
Just a quick comment. I think we have to stop being defensive. I don't know of very many, most black kids don't see white people at all. And secondly, I would challenge them to give me some examples of how kids experience racism. What an example? Tell me. And I think we've got to stop being defensive about it and charge the person bringing that to prove that that is the case. James Baldwin said when we will be when a black man can propose marriage to a white woman and she can say no. You know, maybe you just weren't that pleasant. Not.
And now for the audience, this is a learning moment. Notice, you know, Quisha and I, we represent different generations, and we approach that question just totally differently. And Bob had the wisdom, and he's absolutely right that we should ask them for examples because most of the time they don't have concrete examples. And when they do, it's ludicrous. Then if you ask them for example, they really scratch their heads, and they become very angry, and they don't want to talk. And you want them to leave anyway, so that's all right.
Next question, we'll start with Mr. Woodson. Is systemic or structural racism real? If so, how can America fix these disparities? If not, why has the pro-CRT movement gained so much traction in the insistence that it not only exists, but dominates the lives of Americans of color?
I don't know what systemic racism is. I really don't. I think it's being used. I had this debate with Hawk Newman. He's the Black Lives Matter. You can see it on YouTube. We went at an hour. And I said to him, and sometimes you got to confront arguments with experience. And I said that we had 5 high schools at the turn of the century who were black in Atlanta, Washington, New Orleans, Baltimore, and New York. They had overcrowded classrooms, half the budget of white schools, and yet every one of those black high schools out-tested every white school in that city in 1920. If we were able to achieve excellence under those circumstances when racism was enshrined in law, why can't we do it in those same urban centers where blacks have been in power for 50 years? These are the kinds of objective questions you got to pose. Make them explain themselves rather than you sitting there trying to explain some abstraction like institutional racism. I don't know what it is. White folks are able to cause us to miseducate our people by remote control. We got to get that device that y'all have, and then we can solve this problem.
But I also want to say that what Bob, the statistics that Bob has thrown out to you, most of us have, most of you all have never heard these things because it's never served the progressive agenda for you to learn these things, to know these things. And at the Woodson Center and the book that's for sale tonight, it has studies and citations, and you can look this stuff up for yourself. And Bob pointed out early in the year when we were all, the news, they covered Black Wall Street and how racist white people were, how they burned down, this prosperous Black community. And Bob pointed out that, the real story was how was it that Blacks, less than 60 years after slavery, when you did not have government set-asides and government loans, that they were so prosperous that they had a community that became the envy of white people, that was the bigger story. But no, what you hear today is that Black people can't do anything, that white people have to liberate them, and I believe that is a white supremacist argument that comes from the political left. They also argue that standards have to be lowered because Black people cannot meet those standards when everything that we know defies that. And if you think about Booker T. Washington, who was the most famous Black conservative that was a slave at one time, he started the Tuskegee Institute, his autobiography, the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. At one time, children read it. I read it as I was growing up. It's so inspirational what he was able to accomplish through education. Now you can buy his book, and some versions of it says that it's fiction, because they will not they can't allow it to stand that this Black man coming out of slavery was able to accomplish all these things, and yet the Tuskegee Institute, you can go there, you can visit the institute, but they're saying that his autobiography was a work of fiction.
Oh, I've heard this so many times. I do not know how a system can be racist. People can be racist. Systems cannot be racist. I promise you they cannot, because they are run by people. And those same people who happened to be racist back in the day, they're not there anymore. And there are many times, these very systems that they claim is so racist, many Black people work in federal government. Many Black people, I don't know like who they hang around, but Black people are throughout doing many things in America. We are everywhere. We're doing whatever we want to do. We are living our lives. And so the idea that a system which is inanimate, it's inanimate. It doesn't, think on its own. So it cannot be racist. So I just find that to be dishonest and just.
And wait, just one other thing about the systemic racism. I was born in 1954. That was the year of the Brown versus Board desegregation case that integrated schools across the country. That was a time when you had the segregated South, you had segregation as part of the law of the land. But in the 1960s, we passed 3 major civil rights laws. And those laws made us equal under the law, and the racism that existed after that was all individual racism. So what was structurally in the system of the U.S. government, that was addressed in the 1960s when we tried to be colorblind. Colorblind under the law, the discrimination that persisted was individual discrimination.
Next question. And kudos to the audience. I am swimming in questions. So some of you are asking the same question repeatedly, so I'll start with a double question. What are your views on Black History Month, and should it be taught in our schools? Start with Carol.
I would say that Black history is a part of American history, and we should all be taught history. I don't have a problem with slavery being taught, Civil War, Jim Crow, the birth of the KKK, the birth of the Democratic Party, one of the same. all of these things. And so we should teach American history at age-appropriate levels. And if you teach the true American history, it is a positive story because when the first blacks came to America, the first Africans, they were indentured servants. They served along with white indentured servants that they were set free after 7 years. They became the backbone of free blacks in America. Some of them had slaves themselves, and so did Native Americans, so did whites. Tell the true story. There were always white abolitionists. Tell the true story. The Underground Railroad was used by Harriet Tubman, but it was set up by white people. After slavery and emancipation, it was white people's philanthropy that set up the black schools and colleges and universities. It was white people that fought with black people for civil rights. So tell the story of America. It is an inspirational, it is a promising story.
Next question for Mr. Woodson. I volunteer with an organization here in Franklin that ministers to children in the projects. Over the years, I have seen the same issues of fatherless children, out-of-wedlock babies, etc. How does this cycle stop?
How do you do what? I'm sorry.
How does this cycle stop?
Well, first of all, it's important to know when the cycle began. It did not begin with slavery and discrimination. Our essays in that book said, one of our scholars looked at the records of 6 major plantations that had thousands of slaves to see what was the state of the black family in slavery. 75% of those households had a man and a woman raising children in slavery. 75%. And that lasted for 100 years. 100 years. There were only 20% of blacks were literate at the end of slavery. In less than 40 years, that number increased to 70% when the government sent people to do something for the government. They said the black church is doing it. We can't. So blacks have a rich history. But so we had 2-parent households from the end of slavery up until 1965. 85% of all black families had a man and a woman raising children. Elderly people could walk safely. Our incarceration rates have been under 25%. All of that changed with the poverty programs where they separated work from income, and the intent was to create socialism in America by signing up. And the stigma, anyway, I won't take all the time, but the stigma was removed. The Black Power movement said that the nuclear family was Eurocentric and racist. So therefore, the women's movement said men are redundant, we don't need them. And then the federal government opened offices and recruited people into welfare system, and that's when what the left predicted was true. Dropout, drug addiction, the family disintegrated. What slavery couldn't do, what Jim Crow couldn't do, the poverty programs in the 60s did.
Robin, I'd like to say something. The other thing that happened in the 1960s, in 1962, prayer was removed from school, 1963, Bible reading. And if you look at the dysfunction, that's when it really started in America. And you also should know that the same dysfunction you see in black families also affects white families now today at an increasing rate.
Next question, I'm going to give this one to Quisha. It's a double question, but they kind of go together. President Trump was successful in getting a greater percent of the black vote. Do you see this trend increasing? How can we help? And then follow on, how do you reach out to black liberals and help them be open to conservative values?
So one of the most easiest things you can do, which I learned working for the RNC, is to ask for the vote. Who knew? Republicans do a terrible job asking for black people for the vote, or minority communities. We do not go there. Why? It is, there's a law, at this point, to me, it doesn't really matter why. We just know we need to change that because what President Trump did, he just asked for the vote. And not only did he do that, but he had policies that were good for everyone, because these are principles. These are universal principles. If, it's like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you have programs like the poverty program that incentivizes bad behavior, you're going to get bad behavior. But if you have policies that incentivize good behavior, you're going to get good behavior. So it's reaching out, just actually going there, letting people know what you're about, and asking for the vote, and having policies that aren't insulting to Black folks. So, for instance, school choice. That is a wonderful issue to present, because a lot of times, some states don't have if you're in a certain community, you're stuck in that school system. I don't know a parent who does not want academic excellence for their child. They are willing to. My mother did this. She used another relative's address to get us in a better school. I mean, I know plenty of folks that have done that. That is a crime. It's a crime. You can go to jail for that. That is insane. Just because you live in a certain zip code, that you can't choose in America to put your child to get them a better education. That should never be, because everybody knows that education, it is the great equalizer. If we want to see disparities removed, education is one of those things. But I think reaching out, just actually going there, knocking on doors, showing up in communities, talking to people. I really don't understand why they're so averse to this. It makes no sense.
Black or white, who is the MLK of our time? Anybody?
The MLK are local people in cities. There's no national leader. There's no white national leader. There is no Black leader. We do a lot of gang intervention. There are grassroots leaders like these courageous moms who stepped up and refused to accept their situation and using their pain as a means of helping others. Those are the real leaders. Leaders are local. There is no national leader. Okay.
I believe
And
that.
I agree with Bob, and I know we're getting close to the end of this evening, and so we don't want to keep you all any longer because we know you want to get Bob's book. But I consider Bob Woodson is just a man for our times, that he is the civil rights leader of our times, and I consider critical race theory the civil rights issue of our times, that we should all lock arms together across racial, ethnic, and religious lines and defeat it for once and for all, because it is destroying our nation. It is not helping racial and ethnic minorities, and it's harmful to whites. It's harmful to our nation as a whole, to our military. We have to turn this thing around, and we have to turn it around quickly, because it's affecting every sphere of our lives. Even the institutions, the U.S. military. So this is not something that we can put off. And so I really applaud you all for coming out to get more information. And we are going to keep putting out the information, and you have to keep sharing it.
Let me just one quick statistic. Governor DeSantis, when he won, he only won by 32,000 votes in 2018. That's because 100,000 low-income Black moms and dads voted because of choice in education. Even though Gillum, his Black opponent, brought in Oprah Winfrey and Obama, so 100,000 low-income Black people voted against Oprah and Obama. So Republicans need to, I'm not political, but Republicans need to learn from that. If you invest charitably, if you plant charitably, you can harvest politically, but you don't harvest and plant in the same year.
And I have to say this, and then I'll let Quisha talk, that this event is sponsored by the Be the People Project, which is a 501c3, and it's nonpartisan. And our role is to educate people about conservative values and principles. And, there's a lot of overlap between conservative values and principles and support of our Constitution and Judeo-Christian foundations and political party. But for purposes of this forum, we don't endorse candidates or political parties. We endorse America, its Constitution, its Judeo-Christian values and principles.
I just want to say too, Andrew Gillum actually had on his website that he was going to end school choice, and I think he did, and I was very vocal about that, and I had cousins and family members calling me like, okay, well then who do I vote for? I'm like, the other guy.
Nice. Okay, compound question. And we'll start with Carol. Most people are wise to the term critical race theory by now, as it polls around an 80% negative perception. Less well understood is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yet we encounter these words and policies daily in our lives. That includes churches, businesses, inner cities, community leaders. Can you define how you understand diversity, equity, and inclusion to help or harm an organization in which it is implemented?
Well, there are a lot of things that I can say to you all, and my co-authored book, Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, that book started off as a primer because I had so many parents, policymakers, teachers writing me, trying to understand critical race theory. And the diversity, equity, and inclusion uses the principles of critical race theory. And if you don't understand critical race theory, in America, it divides, pretty much it's a worldview that has Marxist roots, and it divides people into categories of white oppressors and non-white victims. And it argues, again, that all white people are born with white privilege, that white people have a property interest in their whiteness, that white people need to divest themselves of their whiteness, that they need to become actively anti-racist, and they become anti-racist by challenging racism wherever they think it appears. But we know that racism has been totally redefined. Doesn't mean what it meant, even 5 years ago. And the dictionaries are changing definitions. And when you think about the political left's CRT definition and how they're doing diversity, equity, inclusion, equity does not mean equal opportunity. It means equal outcomes. And when they're talking about diversity, they're not talking about it in the sense that we go to a zoo, or if we're Christians, we look at God's creation and we see diversity. Diversity itself is positive. Diversity is not the enemy, but the diversity that they're embracing is one that pretty much excludes white people. It's everyone else. And their inclusion is not true inclusion. And so whatever diversity, equity, and inclusion, may have meant even 5 or 10 years ago, it's not the same today. It's been changed. And I will argue that CRT is a white supremacist theory because it puts all the burden and obligation on white people to fix the problems, and it says that racism is permanent, that black people are permanently disadvantaged, and because of the legacy of slavery and their disadvantage, standards have to be lowered for them. And when Bill Gates funds ethnomathematics and you have teachers and people teaching that math is racist and that there are no right and wrong answers and you can get different answers based on your culture, that is a war against education and against minorities in particular, because if you don't know math, how are you going to get a job doing anything? My art teacher, Sue Gamble, is over there, and even math, even art has some math in it. You have to have some mathematical, analytical, reasoning skills in every profession, and so they're harming black people, and they're harming them too by teaching them they're victims. And I, fortunately, despite my poverty, I had no one telling me that I was a victim. I believed in America. I believed in the American dream. I believed if I worked hard enough that I could overcome my circumstances. I did. And they should have the same opportunity. And whether it's a poor black or a poor white, we should all have those opportunities in America. And the America that I want to see is one where anyone, regardless of their race, ethnicity, that they can overcome the circumstances of their birth. Because where you're born does not determine your outcome. It's your attitude. It's what you believe, those decisions that you make.
Just one note to make that point. Pastor Charles Swindell makes the point that 10% of our life is defined by external circumstances. 90% is our attitude about the 10%. And it's important, though, to have fact-based truth. When they talk about equity, well, black men are only 6% of the population, but they're 80% of the NFL and the NBA. Now, are white folks kinder and gentler in sports than they are in the math class? If you want to compare me with somebody in terms of income, education, I want to be compared to black Nigerians because they outperform whites, everybody else. If racism were the single culprit, then why are not all blacks suffering equally? Nigerians are underrepresented in prison and overrepresented in corporate and income. They have incomes twice as much as whites. So I don't want to be paired with white folks. I want to be a Nigerian.
Well, and not only that, if you look at the colleges and universities and all of these elite schools, the racial and ethnic minorities they have, for the most part, certainly the black ones, are usually descendants of immigrants, immigrant blacks.
Just as the younger person out here, I'm going to say it how we would say it, like in New York. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a hustle. It is. It's a hustle. They pay these consultants hundreds of thousands of dollars to come into corporations, to come into the school system, we're paying them to teach racism.
And guess what?
That's crazy.
They're coming in and they're disrupting your workplaces. And they're actually, many times, these people that majored in ethnic studies, some field that ended with studies. And there was a time when we laughed at those people because we knew they were not going to get a job. Who was going to hire these people? They had no skills. Welcome to your diversity, equity, and inclusion offices.
Follow-on question for anyone. If diversity, equity, inclusion has been implemented at your workplace or your church, and some have been a victim of it, have lost their jobs over it, their churches are not teaching biblical principles because of it, how can you push back?
Sue them.
Well, first of all, you get your handy handbook, which is my book, Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. It has 2 chapters on strategies, and it also has resources, appendices, a glossary. You're going to need that glossary because the meaning of words don't mean what you think they mean. And CRT doesn't always call itself CRT, and lots of parents have learned that it goes by other names such as Action Civics or culturally sensitive learning. Wit and wisdom, yeah, just go down the list. It calls itself all sorts of things, so you need to be able to recognize it. And so that book is a resource that you can use. And yeah, you do sue them because you can challenge the legality and constitutionality of CRT and it will fall. But the most important thing for everyone to attain is knowledge. And so you need to understand CRT in its various forms. You need to form coalitions across racial, ethnic, and partisan lines. Don't assume that because a person is a Democrat that they don't share some of your values and they're not concerned about their own children. They love their children too. They see how destructive it is. Don't write off anyone. Build coalitions, and there are just so many ways. We have 10 specific ways in the book that you can push back against CRT, and you need to stand. You need to have courage. this is the moment to stand. Otherwise, we do lose our nation.
For Mr. Woodson, what and how do you respond to people who call conservative Black Americans Uncle Tom to silence them because they don't fit a leftist Marxist agenda?
I'm sorry.
What do you say to the people, to the folks that call us Uncle Tom and Aunt Jane?
I've never been called that. Because 80% of my closest friends and the people at the Woodson Center serves are ex-something. They have letters in front of their names, not behind them. And when you minister to people who greatest challenge is brokenness from prison, brokenness from drugs, brokenness from... When you deal with people legitimately struggling with brokenness and they are seeking redemption, when they get together, all they want to talk about is their pathway towards redemption. And so we've had in 40 years of conferences and retreats, racial animus, and we have blacks, whites, red people, all kinds of folks in our coalition. Conflict never came up because evil is more powerful than racism.
Now, Bob,
Yes.
are you telling us that no one's ever called you an Uncle Tom?
No, ma'am. When they did, 4 grassroots people got up and walked off the dais. Because if you serve God's people, they will speak and protect you.
That's true.
You don't have to say anything.
Amen.
And so I'm just telling you that that's a reality. If you stand up, God will stand up for you, but you can't be a coward. You can't ever play defense. I don't have any defensive plays in my book. Make them explain themselves. Don't you sit back and defend yourself.
And that
This is a wonderful, God-fearing country, and I say that Black Americans fought in every war. Did they give their lives in vain? Not one was ever convicted of treason. Because I remember the Second World War, it was victory against fascism in Europe and racism here. But one last word, we fought, though, as King, and it's important when we're fighting to fight with what King called agape love.
right.
And that is, you do not seek to vanquish or embarrass or destroy your opponent. You seek their redemption while at
Amen.
the same time protecting yourself from the oppression.
All right. Now, and Bob, that was beautiful, and it was certainly biblical. But I've been called an Aunt Jane, and Uncle Tom, and a whole lot of other names, and some of you all have been called names too. I say that we embrace those epithets, that we do not allow them to silence us. And so, like if you are fearful of engaging in some type of action because you might be called a name, you might be called a name. If you're white, you're going to be called a racist regardless of what you do. And if you're a Black conservative and you fight for Judeo-Christian values and principles, you love America, you're going to be called Uncle Tom or Aunt Jane. And so, this is how the left tries to silence people and neutralize them.
But my point is, and I have been, when I was on a panel before 5,000 Black journalists, the head of the NAACP said, Bob Woodson is an intellectual prostitute.
Ooh.
And I smiled. When someone attacks me, I smile. I said, I was raised to believe when someone's snipping at your butt, it means you're running in front of them. That if you're not taking fire, it means you ain't in the fight. You know about that, right? If you're not flying over the enemy territory, you ain't in the battle.
If you're not getting shot at, you're not near the target.
That's right. You're not fighting if you're not in.
Yeah.
So just accept it. But again, don't be defensive about it.
Yeah.
I have certainly been called names. I have been called the Uncle Tom, the black, white supremacists, the all of it. Sellout. Bed wench. That was one I remember. All kind of stuff. I mean, people say some really vile stuff. I'm praying to get to where you are.
I'm trying to, Bob.
Because I certainly don't back down. I'm just not built like that. But I would say you do fight back. Just a quick little story. So Dr. Phil wanted to have a little debate about critical race theory. They never aired this episode. So I was on there with some others against these highly intellectual folks who were for critical race theory. And so the most intellectual, he was, in his suit and just looking down upon us peasants and saying, oh, it's just a critical race theory, it's just a boogeyman, and you guys are just, making a big deal of nothing, and you just don't want to teach history. They say that a lot. You just don't want to teach history. And so people clapped, So when it was my turn, I sat forward. I said, it is you who don't want to teach history. All you want to do is sum black people up as our only history is slavery, Jim Crow, and a little bit of civil rights. You never tell the true black American story. You never tell the positive American history. The crowd went wild. And the guy was like, no, they didn't know what to say. So stand up to these people. Stand up to these people.
And let me tell you about that Dr. Phil show. I was approached as well, and they asked me would I come on. And when I told them that I had a book on critical race theory and I wanted to come on, I didn't hear from them. And so what they thought was that they were going to get a bunch of black people and make fools out of them. And it was turned around the other way, and that's why that show may never air.
Probably not. But we got them on that day.
Quick question. I'm a Democrat, but I love Carol. Am I wrong?
You know something? I mean, what I want to say about myself is that my identity is in Christ. That's right. And that cuts across racial and ethnic lines, and we should not allow political parties to divide us. We love America. We love people. I mean, and that's all that should matter. And so it should never be about, this one's a Democrat, this one is a Republican. It's about values, principles, love of Christ. We need to come together and be a powerful, united force.
Let me just say, too, that there are two groups of people, I think, on that side. There are those who are ill-informed and those who are ill-intended. And if you are defensive or attack people and not respond with agape love, you force one to join with the other.
Right.
But what we did in our essays, not all of them are conservatives.
That's right.
Clarence Page is a liberal Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist with the Chicago Tribune. He's a good friend. We never voted the same way in our lives. But we are together on God-centered, Christ-centered values. And so therefore it's important to inform people and assume that they just don't know. That's why in our essays, we give factual information that there were 20 blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. 2 of them actually came back and took in the destitute family of the slave master and allowed the mother to sleep in her room because she was delusional and didn't realize slavery had ended. That's radical grace. And so we need to teach our children radical, from history, examples. If somebody who was born a slave could come back and buy the plantation and take in the slave master's destitute family, how could somebody rich black with a PhD from Harvard be mad at anybody?
And I can tell you, that this is a diverse audience, and there are Democrats in here. I love you all. And there are people, I see Americans that care about one another, that want what's best for our nation and what's best for each other. So that's what I see. And so my Democrat friends, I love you, and together we're going to work. We're going to work together and hopefully change this nation and maybe even Nashville. Who knows?
There is a question asking when you're going to run for governor, so just throw that out there.
I'll give you the answer that I gave everyone before I was persuaded to run for mayor, is that God has called me to hold politicians accountable, and I believe not to be one. But if God were ever to give me a different message, I would be attuned to that message. But I believe that the platform he's given me is more important than what I would accomplish serving at the local level, or being a governor, or even being in the Senate, or being in the House. I think that those institutions are so corrupt, they need people on the outside to hold those politicians accountable.
I definitely want to get this question. I feel a lot of pain in it, so any advice for a conservative Christian family who has lost the relationship with their 34-year-old daughter who has gone woke?
Woke.
Who's gone woke? I have, when I told my family that I was going to start helping the Republican Party, and I was so excited, I thought when I was sharing all this new information with them about disparities and income, all this stuff that I had learned, I thought they were going to be like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much, thanks." Where have you been? My mother said, "Oh my gosh, she's drunk the Kool-Aid." So I have struggled with this in my own family. It has put a strain on my relationship with my mother and my younger sister. However, we have decided not to let that tear us apart as a family. If we don't have to talk about politics, we just don't talk about politics. They might throw a jab at me every now and again, and I can take it because I'm conservative, but they can't because they're liberal. So, just kidding. No, but I think it's more important to try to repair that relationship, because what you don't want is to be so far from each other that maybe something is going on with your child that he or she can't be reached, that it is so strained that he or she feels like they can't come to you. And so I would say, you have to fight with everything to make sure that you keep your family. Family is important. Keep your family together. It's not, it shouldn't get to that point. And I know it's hard. It is tough when they say all these crazy things, but it's worth it to try to bring them back in, just in love, and not anything to do with politics or any of that.
All right. I have a book for that. Abduction, How Liberalism Steals the Hearts and Minds of Our Children. And it was co-authored with a pastor named Steve Fiesel. And we wrote the book because we both noticed he had taught at Christian schools. I had taught at, the secular elite institutions, that a lot of kids that were raised in strong Christian families went to college. By Thanksgiving, they were questioning their faith. By Christmas, many of them were atheists. And so I think that you need to understand that there is an agenda to indoctrinate your children. And at first, we had focused on colleges and universities, and now, ground zero is K through 12. Like this critical race theory, it's come out of the universities, and now it's K through 12. They're very open about their agenda. And I think that you need to know that you're dealing with someone that has been indoctrinated, brainwashed. And I believe that the Christian response, it's always love and prayer. Because prayer does change things, and I can think of situations and people that maybe I prayed for like 10 years, and I said, I don't know how long I prayed. I stopped praying, and then all of a sudden I saw the change and the result. And so I think sometimes the family is not the best person that can bring the information that's going to bring someone out of that. but you can pray that God will connect them with people. And, I've talked with a woman whose daughter has been, totally taken over. She's a vegan. The mother had stopped cooking for her, and I suggested that the mother, for Thanksgiving, that she cook a vegan meal for her daughter, and just show that kind of love, and just don't take the bait, because they'll bait you. They know what to say to get under our skin. When we respond differently, then they would respond differently. So prayer, but also showing that love of Christ, that unconditional love that's very hard to show. And I think over time, the Bible says if you train up a child right, that they will, they'll come back. And so you have to have faith in that. It may not happen immediately, but I believe it will happen.
When you find an answer, share it with me so I can convince my 41-year-old son to
Well,
come
41 is, hey, but wait a minute. Hey, I didn't get saved until I was in my 40s. I did not get saved until I was in my 40s.
Everybody's got woke members in their family. I know I do.
Well, wait a minute. You didn't hear me. I got saved when I was in my 40s because God gave me what I needed to have to believe. And so, like 40 is kind of young. I wouldn't mind being 40 now. And so I think that when kids reach 40, they start seeing things. You reach 40 and you start thinking about, the next 10 years, the next 15 years. And so I think there's a lot of hope for your son because he is your son. Because he is your son. He sees the example that you're doing in the world. So we should never give up on our children.
It's coming around, but my 26-year-old granddaughter is straight. She's like a dad.
Where did she go to school? Where did she go to school?
My wife and my daughter, and that's it.
Uh-huh.
But
in other words, we feel your pain.
we feel your pain.
All right, we are scheduled to go till 9:45 or 9:50. You guys feeling good? A couple more questions?
We're scheduled for 9:45.
Sorry, 8, my bad.
Okay.
Maybe I didn't set my clock for daylight savings.
See, you're driving people away.
All right, is there anything that you feel black people would like non-black people to know?
I can say, stop helping us. just stop helping us, that's all. Just be like everybody else, that's all.
Well, I have something. It really bothers me when a white person, and some of these are conservatives, when they apologize and say, they have an opinion, but then they start apologizing and said, I can't possibly know what it's like, to be black, and they do all these, this preface. I don't need it. Talk. and you know something? There are a lot of older people that tell me that I'm the only black friend. And they said, I don't know why I never had a black friend. And I think that I'm the only black friend because they know they can say anything to me, and we're going to have a conversation. I'm not going to get upset. We're just going to talk back and forth. And so they're not afraid of me. And so we need to have relationships where we have friends, and we don't see that race. I mean, we're just having a conversation, and that's where we should aim to go.
I am along with Mr. Woodson because it's Bob. Sorry. Stop help. It's insulting. It is insulting to think that we are somehow. That actually gives validity to this idea that black people are different. If you approach us differently, we're not. We want the same things. We want freedom. We want education for our children. We want great income. We want the same things. So when we are treated differently, or you feel like you can't say to a black person, and I understand because it's more of like the social pressures of it, I guess, that you feel like, oh my God, I don't know like how to maneuver this thing. But treat people how you want to be treated.
Well, let me say this before we stop all the white folks from helping us. When I was at that community college, and when the people that encouraged me to continue my education, that told me I was smart, that wrote letters for me, I mean, I didn't know anything about academia. They would have been white folk. And I can tell you that my advisor at my four-year college, he was someone that when I entered the college, there were black students that came to me. They told me he was a racist. They gave me the list of all the racist professors. Well, I always had a personality that I'll show them. And so I signed up for this professor's class, and he turned out to be a wonderful man. He was a Republican. He was conservative. He introduced me to Thomas Sowell and Glenn Lowry and Walter Williams, and as well as Milton Friedman and Edward Banfield and other conservative scholars. And and so if I had, if it hadn't been for white people helping me, because black people are not going to help you.
We don't want the woke help. The woke help. That's the kind of help I'm talking about.
But I can tell you, too, that, okay, I belong now. I've been in black churches and white churches, and now I'm in a church that's predominantly white. But the people that I see working in the inner city, and some of them go into the projects where I am afraid to go, they're mostly white people. They're white people. And so there's some help that you can give, but there is a hustle. And there's sometimes these nice white folks are being shook down for money. So you have to be careful how you do it. But there's some help that people need. People need encouragement. They need love. They need respect. They need, for you to treat them the way you'd want to be treated. The golden rule, that's what they need.
Let me just say in conclusion on this point, and that is my first exposure as a civil rights activist, my first exposure to conservatives when I went to the American Enterprise Institute. And what I found refreshing about being among white conservatives, I went into an institution where I didn't know anybody and they treated me like a stranger. And I was flattered by that. Because when I was around nice liberal folks, I could say anything, no matter how stupid, and they just say, oh, that's the greatest thing I ever heard. I'd rather be almost hated than patronized. Because at least the kind of bigotry that I confronted in Mississippi in the 50s was more honest than the kind of bigotry that comes from someone who feels sorry for me and who pities me or provides special exemption for black folks. That kind of bigotry is worse than to give me an old-fashioned bigot than to get me somebody who just patronizes me and tells me that I can't make it, or nothing is more lethal than the exemption from personal responsibility because of your color.
Amen.
And so I just think we should all just try to treat each other the way, if I don't know you, treat me like a stranger.
But I can tell you that that God has used believers and unbelievers in my life, and I've had lots of encouragement. But the conservatives, and I was a Democrat most of my life. I became a Republican in 2009. I became a Christian, a devout believer in 1999, and then politically, I went from being an independent to eventually, I left the Democrats. When you're in America, most of the time you're born black and Democrat. So I was a Democrat most of my life. I had a Christian conversion experience and became a devout believer in 1999. I became very uncomfortable voting in one particular way. And then by 2009, I became a Republican. But throughout my life, the people that, just really encouraged me and supported me, they were disproportionately white. And I found that among black elites, they had a problem with me because they came from more affluent backgrounds, and here I came from dirt poor, and I was not a part of their organizations. When I showed up at Princeton, I had not been a part of the black political scientists. That created a big problem because they wanted to vet people and say who could go where, and then all of a sudden there was this black woman at Princeton, that people were talking about. And so I had caught grief. I was called a black conservative long before I considered myself one. And I got threats from the black community, and that's part of my black experience as someone that was defying the odds. And I might also mention that my first job was at Princeton. I got early tenure there, and I invited Bob to speak, and that's when I first met Bob.
I believe this will be our final question. It's a compound question. I'll start with Quisha. First part, how do you think we can overcome the bias of the media? Second part, and this is part of the answer. The squad has a collective voice enhanced by the title. Can the three of you form a group along with other sensible blacks like Herschel Walker, Vernon Jones, Shelby Steele, and give yourselves a title and collective voice and teach to millions what you are teaching tonight?
I really appreciate that. But there is, I think, when I hear collective, I really do believe in individuals.
Right.
I really do, and I understand what they're saying. But I believe that, just because we're all black, it doesn't mean we're going to all think the same. And I think we should try to break that up. That's not American to me, what the squad is doing. Like, everybody has to say the same thing, and we all have to, that's literally not what that's like what America was running against. So I appreciate it. However, I think we should try to encourage more individual voices, more just standing up for you and your family, standing up for what you believe in. The media. I wrote an article in the Western Journal. It was, I think it was one of my first ones I had ever written. And I talked about how the media is psychologically abusing Black America. So, thank you. So whenever you see, a crime, particularly when a white cop shoots a black man in particular, they make it seem like it's only happening to Black people. They will show it on loop. It's like, okay, it's like, all right, everybody get ready. We're going to have riots for 3 weeks. They capitalize on Black trauma, showing it over and over and over again. There was a man, Tony Timpa, he died the exact same way that George Floyd did, and nobody talks about him. His face was in the pavement. He was a white guy, white cops. They were laughing at him as he took his last breaths in the middle of the street. What about his family's justice? There are so many instances of other families that suffer through, all different types of trauma and stuff like that. But they use Black people for their gain. I am sick and tired of that. That is I hate that about the media. Because it's not that, we're going to show this story because we just care so much about, Black folks getting shot. No, you don't. They do not. What they are doing is trying to protect their bottom line. That's it. And I would love for Black people to get the memo, like, okay, when we see the headline, just sit back and say, okay, and go and just turn the channel, find something else, go find another story, because I'm tired of us being it's bait. It's bait. We have to realize the game that they are playing, and so that's my comments on the media. Ugh.
I really believe that the biggest challenge the nation faces is upward mobility for those at the bottom, regardless of their race. And we've got to come together across racial lines. As I said, we're bringing together thousands of moms who lost children to suicide, opiate addictions. Opiate addiction is so bad in the state of Ohio that they have refrigerator trucks to put all of the bodies. but no one knows about that. That the suicide rate in Silicon Valley is 6 times the national average among teenagers. And they're 2-parent households with most of the parents have master's degrees with $180,000 median income. And so we are bringing together those moms from Silicon Valley, from Appalachia, and also the inner city, because the free fall, the moral and spiritual free fall that is consuming these young people is the biggest challenge we face. But we can't solve that problem if we have to look at each other through the prism of race.
Right.
And so we believe that by mobilizing that group of people by the thousands, we can really come together in unity. And the welfare of our children is more powerful than the lure of race. And so that's what we have to do. The answer is not in political electing the right office either. Because you can go into any low-income community and you can't tell me which political party is in power.
Right.
So the problem is in the culture, but it's in our hands. And that's why we at the Woodson Center are mobilizing those moms. They are a powerful force. You can see it in the school boards right now that are being turned. The moms are a powerful force, but we need to come together and push race off the table. If we not, America won't survive. Thank you.
And I would say that it would be more beneficial for America if they saw whites and blacks and other groups coming together, having conversations, modeling civility, than to have a bunch of black conservatives, going around, preaching to other people. We are strong individualists, and we reject that, and so we're just so honored that you came tonight.